welcome to Food for Your Mind, episode 8. Today we will be talking about The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson and the Asiago Chicken Club from Wendy's. So, let's dig in, shall we? I think I got a home-style patty, not the spicy patty, which is what I really wanted. Let's see. See, I did the self-ordering thing. That was my problem. I should have ordered from the person. Still, this is pretty good. The ranch sauce is good. Bacon's good. This is probably my favorite thing I've gotten from Wendy's so far, which is what I'd hoped for. I didn't get the fries today, so gonna make up the difference with this beer. Oh yeah, there we go. That was pretty good. I think I'm gonna give that a 9. I had one with the spicy chicken sandwich, like that version of it. That was the best. I would have given that a 10 out of 10, but I'm gonna give this one a 9. So on to The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I want to say up front that I think of all the books that I'm going to review for this first season of Food for Your Mind, this is probably my favorite. I would give this book a 10, obviously. Anna Karenina also got a 10. Is this book really as good as Anna Karenina? Well, I don't know. It's certainly more fun than Anna Karenina, and fun's a pretty important factor in determining how good something is, I would say. So anyway, let's start with some biographical notes about Shirley Jackson. She was born in San Francisco, California, December 14th, 1916. She attends Syracuse University. Her first novel was called The Road Through the Wall. I've actually never read that one, but apparently that's just kind of an autobiographical novel. Shortly thereafter, she wrote a very famous short story called The Lottery, which was published in the New Yorker, and I think drew like more complaint letters than anything that had been published in the New Yorker up to that point. So that's pretty impressive, right? She also wrote 2 nonfiction books that I have read called Life Among the Savages and Raising Demons. These were basically just about her life as a mother, and these were published in women's magazines of the 50s and 60s. Things like Ms. Magazine. Then she writes what are probably her... The Lottery is very famous, of course. But in terms of novels, she writes her 2 most famous books. This one, The Haunting of Hill House, and another one that's very good called We Have Always Lived in the Castle. But this is definitely my favorite of hers by a long way. And like I already said, this is my favorite book I'm going to review this season on Food for Your Mind. The whole Wendy's menu. Before I move on to talk about the book, I did want to talk about the adaptations that have been made of this. There's a very good black and white film which is just titled The Haunting. So if you ever get a chance to see that, check it out. There was also the 2000s era Haunting. That's garbage. Skip that. And there's the new TV show that just came on Netflix like the past week or so. That's also garbage. Skip that as well. But that black and white movie and, of course, the book are both amazing. This book strikes just the right balance in terms of, the humor is never goofy, it's never silly, it never breaks the frightening aspect of the book. I contend that this is the best haunted house story, and in fact, I would say maybe the best horror novel ever written in any language. I definitely prefer this to, Edgar Allan Poe, E.T.A. Hoffman, Stephen King, certainly, Henry James, the Gothic novels. This, we'll talk about what makes this one special as we go along, but this one has something that the other ones don't have. Okay, so let's start talking about why. Why is this book so good? Well, it has the same things going for it that would make any book good. Namely, first of all, the characters. One of the most important things you want in a work of horror, in terms of the characters, is you want moral range. You want some of those characters to be better than others, so that a few, if bad things happen to them, the audience can maybe enjoy it a bit, or at least not feel too bad. And yet there are other characters that the audience doesn't want anything bad to happen to you. The way the book deals with class, we've talked a lot about class over these series of fast food and book-related lectures that I've been giving. Haunted house books have a kind of class dimension built into them. Because obviously, someone had to have the money to build this big house that is now haunted, and something apparently happened to them. Their money perhaps didn't even save them. There is also the atmosphere of the book, specifically the descriptions of landscape, descriptions of architecture, which go a long way to creating a sense of ominousness and foreboding. Last but not least, in any work of horror, you've got to have a little bit of humor, so that you can give people, when you want to, a little bit of relief from the scariness, and then when it comes back to scary, well, then they're really ready for it, you know? In talking about the other books that we've reviewed, you know, Anna Karenina, Shining, you know, the list goes on. We've talked a lot about what the books mean, and we haven't talked quite as much about literary technique. I guess it's easier, maybe, sometimes to say what things mean than to figure out how people are accomplishing artistic things. But with this book, I want to focus on one specific technique that she uses over and over and over again throughout the novel, which is repetition. Repetition seems like a fairly easy technique to use, and I guess it's true. I mean, it's kind of it's cheap in terms of, like, you know, man hours or woman hours. You don't have to write a new thing. You just repeat what you wrote before. But there's more to it than that. When I say repetition here, by the way, I don't mean like doubling or you know, like twins, or what Sigmund Freud called the uncanny in his famous lecture. What I'm talking about is sentence level doubling. Literally having a sentence in the book and then having that sentence again, or a very similar sentence again, or perhaps a sentence that starts the same way, or a sentence that ends the same way. In terms of my thinking over what exactly this is doing to the reader, having these things repeat so often, one thing that came to mind was the concept of the mantra. You know about this in, you know, Buddhism or whatever, whichever one of those crazy Eastern religions it is. But the idea is you pick out a sentence that is meaningful to you, and then you just repeat it over and over and over again. And that eventually, so some people claim, this is a path to inner peace, to enlightenment. So the way you do it is you just think a sentence like, open the door down the hall, and you just say that over and over to yourself, either out loud or in your head. Let's try it right now, shall we? Open the door down the hall. 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 As you keep doing that, sitting there, saying something over and over and over to yourself, I guess one of two things happen. Either you come to concentrate on the content of what you're saying in a new way, or your mind just kind of goes blank and you feel the kind of background noise of your personality or emotions beginning to kind of rise up and get louder and louder and louder. To touch a little bit on maybe what things mean a bit, another motif that I saw repeated over and over again in this book was animals. Lots and lots of animals in this book, both predators and prey. And the predatory animals often kind of in a somehow defanged. They're made unthreatening. Typically threatening animals are kind of made unthreatening often. And I suppose what she's doing in including these animals is trying to kind of get to the bottom of the fear response in humans. Our fear reaction, you know what you feel like when you're afraid. Your heart beats faster, your blood pressure goes up. You get ready for action, in short. Though that response, that's not designed to help human beings cope with death by old age or understand our mortality. That's to help you run away from predators, or if another dude is attacking you, fight him off or run away. Enough about my thoughts. Let's read some stuff out of the book, and then we can see how it all relates to one another. This is the very beginning. It starts out very well. Notice the animals in the very beginning. No live organism, no, not people, but just organism, No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Larks and katydids, of course, those are both prey animals, and those are you're kind of made to empathize with the prey animals over the course of the book. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. Now, there wasn't any repetition of sentences in that first bit, but you do notice repetition of sound. That is, assonance and consonants and things like that. If you don't know what that is, look it up. I always thought, I could never be a high school teacher because I could never teach those high school kids about assonance, Some guys in the back is going to be like, hey, you can kiss my assonance. The first character that we meet in this novel is Dr. John Montague. He's the doctor of philosophy who has set up this experiment. All these people are going to go and live in this house, haunted house, for a couple days and record what goes on there. So here's a bit about him. It had cost him a good deal in money and pride, since he was not a begging man, to rent Hill House for 3 months. But he expected absolutely to be compensated for his pains by the sensation followed upon the publication of his definitive work on the causes and effects of psychic disturbances and a house commonly known as haunted, with haunted in quotes. He had been looking for an honestly haunted house all his life. That's a beautiful, beautiful expression. Honestly haunted house. All the H's there. When he heard of Hill House, he had been at first doubtful, then hopeful, then indefatigable. He was not the man to let go of Hill House once he had found it. This professor, of course, is more of an upper-class character, it's fair to say. This is just the next page. This is very, very interesting. Listen to this closely. Perhaps the leisurely ways of Victorian life lend themselves more agreeably to the devices of psychic investigation, or perhaps the painstaking documentation of phenomena has largely gone out as a means of determining actuality. Okay, let's start. There's a lot going on there. Let's start at the beginning. Perhaps the leisurely ways of Victorian life. Okay, leisurely ways of Victorian life. Was the Victorian era more leisurely for most people? Was it more leisurely for chimney sweeps and coal miners and stuff? No! No, the Victorian era was not more leisurely for most people. It was perhaps only more leisurely for professors, shall we say, ghost hunters, etc. And it's fair to say that in the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th, the Victorian era, ghost hunting was the province of the wealthy. I don't think that's actually true in 2018. I think most of the people who go out hunting ghosts these days are more towards the bottom of the income scale. But it wasn't always this way. The more interesting point here is that when Dr. Montague thinks of Victorian life, he thinks of upper-class Victorian life. So we've met Professor Montague. I wanted to just go through the other 4 main characters very briefly. There's Eleanor. Eleanor is the protagonist of the novel. She is whom you are most intended to identify with, to sympathize with. She's the one who you want things to work out for. And she is she's the most lower class of any of the 4 main characters. Though she does have some resources. You have to have some resources to get to Hill House. You've got to have a car, for example. Eleanor only owns part of a car, and so she kind of has to steal it a bit to get there. Then there's Theodora, who is kind of her friend for most of the novel. Theodora is an artist, but she's presented as kind of a more mercenary sort of commercial artist. So she seems to be doing okay in her artistic career financially, which is very rare. Most artists don't make very much money from their art, I can tell you that. Last of the main 4, there's Luke. Luke is destined to inherit Hill House. He's a member of the family that constructed it. But he's very much a layabout. He's similarly an upper-class character, just like Dr. Montague, the only dude. But whereas Dr. Montague has, gone to school and studied and perhaps, worked, given some blood, sweat, and tears to earn his place in society, Luke hasn't. He's really just kind of a rascal and screw up. So he's the other side of the upper class in a way, as compared to Dr. Montague. This is Eleanor on her way to Hill House. And she thought, I might just go along to Hill House, where I'm expected, and where I'm being given shelter and room and board and a small token salary in consideration of forsaking my commitments and involvements in the city and running away to see the world. I wonder what Dr. Montague is like. I wonder what Hill House is like. I wonder who else will be there. Notice those last three sentences, they all start the same way. They all start, I wonder. There's a term for that. There's a term for that, but I can't remember what it is, where you have a series of sentences that all start the same way. This is still Eleanor, just a page later. On the main street of one village, she passed a vast house, pillared and walled, with shutters over the windows, and a pair of stone lions guarding the steps. And she thought that perhaps she might live there, dusting the lions each morning and patting their heads good night. Remember when I was talking about the animals, especially the big predatory animals, but in a way that is defanged. And you see here, Eleanor thinks of herself as being the kind of caretaker of these big predatory animals, not being afraid of them. And this is something that gives her a bit of calm and a bit of courage on her way to her destination. There's so many great things, great little bits in this book. This is one of my favorite things. She sees a girl she's in a restaurant, and she sees a girl who's refusing to drink her milk out of the cups that she has. She wants her cup at home, what she calls her cup of stars. And she'll only drink milk after her cup of stars. And Eleanor is watching her as she's refusing to drink out of the regular cup. So this is that part. Don't do it, Eleanor told the little girl. She doesn't actually tell her this, she's just thinking in her head. Don't do it, Eleanor told the little girl. Insist on your cup of stars. Once they've trapped you into being like everyone else, you will never see your cup of stars again. Don't do it. Repetition again. And the little girl glanced at her and smiled a little subtle, dimpling, wholly comprehending smile, and shook her head stubbornly at the glass. Brave girl, Eleanor thought. Wise, brave girl. That's the truth. If you let them take your cup of stars away, you will never get it back. As I was rereading this book, there's another funny little thing that I noticed. There are very, very few kind of, I guess, cultural signifiers that tell you where this is taking place. It's not even clear it's in America, except for a few little, there's like Route 59 that she takes, which would be like the A59 if you were in England. But that's the only thing that even establishes that we're in America. And if you read these like servants dialogue and kind of like Cockney, it all kind of seems like that's how it's actually supposed to be. She's actually arriving at Hill House now. We'll read this part. After a minute, she blew the horn again and then saw a man coming toward her from inside the gate. He was as dark and unwelcoming as the padlock, and before he moved toward the gate, he peered through the bars at her, scowling. What you want? His voice was sharp, mean. I want to come in, please. Please unlock the gate. Who say? Why, she faltered. I'm supposed to come in, she said at last. What for? I'm expected. Or am I? She wondered suddenly. Is this as far as I go? Oh, bye. And it goes on like that. Obviously, as I was saying earlier, any kind of haunted house story, there's a kind of very obvious class dimension built in. The servants in this book are great. They are exactly what you want in your haunted house servants. I wrote down some adjectives. They're very sullen. I think they actually mentioned the word sullen comes up a couple times. Impudent. They can often be lazy, though these servants actually aren't lazy, and the cook is quite competent and does her job very well. Perhaps, slyness or some cockiness, could be ill-tempered in some way. That's really what you want. Yeah, Mrs. Dudley is the cook's name. Here's a bit about her. Silently, the woman stood aside. Her apron was clean, her hair was neat, and yet gave an indefinable air of dirtiness, quite in keeping with her husband. And the suspicious sullenness of her face was a match for the malicious petulance of his. No, Eleanor thought herself, it's partly because everything seems so dark around here, and partly because I expected that man's wife to be ugly. If I hadn't seen Hill House, would I be so unfair to these people? They only take care of it after all. Here's skipping ahead to when the ghostly happenings, the haunted happenings begin to happen, I guess. Watch the repetition here. It's done in a very, very unique way. It sounded, Eleanor thought, like a hollow noise, a hollow bang, as though something were hitting the doors with an iron kettle, or an iron bar, or an iron glove. It pounded regularly for a minute, and then suddenly more softly, and then again for a quick flurry, seeming to be going methodically from door to door at the end of the hall. Distantly, she thought she heard the voices of Luke and the doctor calling from somewhere below, and she thought, they are not up here with us at all, and heard the iron crashing against what must have been a door very close. On the England versus America point, because they're like, this is one of those books where like it's not set in England. You can tell it's set in America, but there's a distinctly kind of British vibe that runs through the whole book, and I'm still trying to like kind of figure out what to make of that. But here's a part where maybe they're letting us in on a secret here. Poltergeists, however, are rock bottom on the supernatural social scale. They are destructive but mindless in wildness. They are merely undirected force. Do you recall, he asked with a little smile, Oscar Wilde's lovely story, The Canterville Ghost? This is actually a fairly good story. The first thing I think Oscar Wilde ever wrote, so check that out too. The American twins who routed the fine old English ghost, Theodore said. Exactly. I have always liked the notion that the American twins were actually a poltergeist phenomenon. Certainly poltergeists can overshadow any more interesting manifestation. Bad ghosts drive out good, and he patted his hands happily. They drive out everything else too. He added, there is a manor in Scotland infested with poltergeists, where as many as 17 spontaneous fires have broken out in one day. Okay, I just want to read two more things, and then we'll be done. This is going to be a longer review, because as I said, this is probably my favorite book out of the books I'm going to review. This is a bit, maybe 2/3 of the way through. Eleanor and Theodora have been kind of frightened out of the house and are walking around the outside of it, or around the grounds. They moved on, the path unrolling ahead of them, the white trees unchanging on either side, and above all, the black sky lying thick overhead. Their feet were shimmering white where they touched the path. Theodora's hand was pale and luminous. Ahead of them, the path curved out of sight, and they walked slowly on, moving their feet precisely because it was the only physical act possible to them. The only thing left to keep them from sinking into the awful blackness and whiteness and luminous evil glow. Now I really am afraid, Eleanor thought in words of fire. Remotely she could still feel Theodora's hand on her arm, but Theodora was distant, locked away. It was bitterly cold, with no human warmth near. Now I am really afraid, she repeats, Eleanor thought. But she put her feet forward one after the other, shivering as they touched the path, shivering with mindless cold. The path unwound. Perhaps it was taking them somewhere, willfully, since neither of them could step off it and go knowingly into the annihilation of whiteness that was the grass on either side. The path curved, black and shining, and they followed. Theodora's hand tightened, and Eleanor caught her breath in a little sob. Had something moved ahead, something whiter than the white trees, beckoning, fading into the trees, watching? Was there movement beside them, imperceptible in the soundless night? Did some footstep go invisibly along them in the white grass? Where were they? The path led them to its destined end and died beneath their feet. Eleanor and Theodora looked into a garden, their eyes blinded with the light of sun and rich color. Incredibly, there was a picnic party on the grass in the garden. This is something they're seeing in their minds, or seeing in a kind of ghostly way, I guess. They could hear the laughter of children, the affectionate, amused voices of the mother and father. The grass was richly, thickly green, and the flowers were colored red and orange and yellow. The sky was blue and gold, and one child wore a scarlet jumper and raised its voice again in laughter, tumbling after a puppy over the grass. Then again, there's those meek, defanged animals, or animals rendered harmless. There was a checked tablecloth spread out, and smiling, the mother leaned over to take up a plate of bright fruit. Then Theodora screamed. "Don't look back," she cried out in a voice high with fear. "Don't look back, don't look, run." And of course, they never tell you what she saw behind her, but it must be something that is as terrible as this picnic is good. Sometimes you're reading through a book and you're developing a kind of a theory about it, we'll say. And then the author seems to actually come out and say exactly what you're thinking. And this is where it happens in this book, page 141. Let's read. "Here," she said, "this is Mr. Montague, Dr. Montague's wife, Mrs. Montague, who shows up towards the end with her associate Arthur. Here, she said, Arthur, you read the questions and I'll read the answers. That way it will sound more natural. They've done a kind of Ouija board seance, and this is the report. Off we go, Arthur said brightly, and leaned over Mrs. Montague's shoulder. Now, let me see. Start right about here. With who are you? Righto. Who are you? Nell, Mrs. Montague read in her sharp voice, and Eleanor and Theodora and Luke and the doctor turned, listening. Nell who? Eleanor, Nellie, Nell. They sometimes do that, Mrs. Montague broke off to explain. They repeat a word over and over to make sure it comes across all right. Arthur cleared his throat. What do you want? He read, home. Do you want to go home? And Theodora shrugged comically at Eleanor. Want to be home. What are you doing here? Waiting. Waiting for what? Home. Arthur stopped and nodded profoundly. There it is again, he said. Like a word, and use it over and over, just for the sound of it. So, hey, if you need more proof that I am correct in my various imaginings, I don't think it can get much clearer than that. So, we're going to conclude with that. I get 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. Read this book. It's 200 pages. You can read it in a day. Anyone would like it. Go get it right now. Read it.